Welcome to West Virginia and Commonplace. Today, I have a guest with me. That's another podcaster. And this is the second episode that I'm doing of Podcast Collide. Stephanie, please tell my audience about you and tell them about your podcast.
All right. Well, I'm Stephanie. I live in Canada, and I started my podcast in August. It's called Steph Up Podcast because of my name and because it's about learning about different things. So my tagline is we delve into different topics to learn about ourselves and more about others. And I'm learning a lot about personal development, self-growth. And so I want to share that with others as I'm learning and then talk to other people. So it's kind of like we're moving forward in life. And that's why I named it Step Up.
Okay, I like that. And that makes sense there. Step up. Now,
although it messes with people's autocorrects. Like you told me, it goes step up a lot of the times. Right?
Yeah, it goes step up. And then originally what got us talking, because in the podcast community, y'all guys have to understand, we all share each other's podcasts. Well, I'm an Apple person, and everybody knows that I'm an Apple fanatic. When I go look on Apple and I look for this podcast, I couldn't find it. So I came back to you and asked you about it. And that's what started our long conversation. And then you went back and looked at it. And then we both looked at it at some different point. And I finally got the right name and everything. And I got the podcast and I was able to listen to it and go on from there. So that take on that name, yes, it is hard with autocorrect. No doubt in that.
Yeah. Or also because my website is Steph Up Podcast and also my Facebook, but it's actually two words. It's Steph Up Podcast. And so then I get like, oh, should I change it? What, gets confusing. I don't know.
Okay, so what made you want to develop a podcast? I know that you explained it just a moment ago, but I'm going to go deep into my question. I'm going to kind of do a little Barbara Walters thing or Diane Sawyer. Like, what made you decide that you wanted to do a podcast? Because it's so many things that you could have been doing during COVID-19 or any time in life. What made you want to do a podcast?
Well, I had to quit my job about a year ago due to health issues. Okay. And then I'm starting to get into the voice acting business. So I was researching mics and sound and editing software and all these things. And it's very overwhelming. And I'm the type that procrastinates. So I will put it off. But I was thinking, I like to get creative. And I like to have chats with people. So I was thinking, what if I did a podcast? And then if I started, I would have deadlines. So I would have to learn this by a certain time and I would have to do this, right? And that kind of got me rolling into understanding. I've learned so much in that time, which I probably would have kept putting off until who knows when. But I do enjoy chatting with people. I used to be super shy when I was a kid. And then I lived in Toronto for 10 years and I worked on the phones for 7, which actually really got me less shy. And I started just chatting with people. And then, so now I enjoy chatting with people, even though when I was younger, I didn't.
Okay. Now that you've had this podcast going for a while, what is one of the great takeaways from doing this podcast? Like, I'll give you an example for me, for instance. I like doing this podcast because I meet so many people from different places around the world. Because in the pre-talk that I do with everybody, once you understand what I do for a living, you understand I see the United States. So that's the United States. Nobody from the United States is impressive to me on that. Just meeting people from different countries for a simple fact, because we have different ways of living, but we're really similar in other forms. So what's your biggest takeaway from your podcast?
Honestly, I think you're definitely right about meeting people from different countries. I've had Zoom calls with a lot of people from the United States. One guy from Russia.
Ooh.
Because I was involved in like this podcast Zoom group, so we were just discussing our podcast, and it's just it's neat just to meet people and to get ideas. I love, like I said, I like to be creative. So I'll just have a thought like, oh, I want to do a topic on this. And then I might know somebody. And I realize over the years, I know a lot of people. Or I'll reach out to somebody and think, hey, why not? We'll try reaching out and seeing if they'll say they'll come on. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. But it's very interesting. I've learned a lot from having the different conversations. So that is definitely fun. And then just being able to share that. I'm that type that wants to be able to what's it called? See, I forget words sometimes. I was really bad when I worked on the phones. I'd be like, what was that word? And then they would tell me. I want to basically like make
Enhance?
enhance. Yeah, there's something John Maxwell says, and I can't remember the specific wording. But
Enlighten?
make other people's lives better by what you're doing.
Yeah, so enhance their lives, basically.
Yeah, it's see, sometimes my brain's not always there. That's a problem with talking. Sometimes I'm like, I don't even know what words I'm saying. But then I just laugh it off, and then it's just like, well, it's fun.
So, Ari, inside of the production, because see, this is the thing that I love about certain podcasters in our pre-talk and audience. Let me tell you this about the pre-talk. What we do with podcasts and doing it with another podcaster is really weird to me. We know how to work our guest up. You know how to win your guest over. When I'm talking to another podcaster, I have to figure a common ground, because just like when I started this podcast a lot. The one thing that is not said, and I will say this in general public, I actually have to look at, like, me and you collaborate, and I've seen there was enough similarities that, hey, we can collaborate. I've had some that I want to collaborate with, but I've seen like that it's just too much to the other side of the world for me to get involved with. So I'm like, hey, I'll appreciate them, still give them shout outs. So how do you handle your production? Because that's the one thing that I like to ask inside, to podcasters. How do you handle the production? Because I'll give you a rundown of mine real quick. Mine is a Zoom call. I throw it in GarageBand like I told you earlier, and I might fix it up a little bit, and there it goes. I cut a little bit here and there in that sound. How do you do your production?
Oh boy. I am a perfectionist, so I'm still striving for that really great sound.
Okay.
And I have people who will message me and they're like, hey, the sound wasn't so great on that one. I'm like, yeah, I know. I do go on Zoom and I meet with people and we record on there. I was also told by an editor, shout out to Bad Pod, and she said, if you go and you can use Zencaster to record it separately so that the sound is a lot better. Zencaster doesn't always work though. It all depends. So, but mostly, yeah, I just take the Zoom call and then I use Adobe Audition to edit.
Okay.
And that's what I was doing. Although now I do send it to Bad Pod. And then I go through, I have a blog on my website. So I write up my own thoughts on the episode we did. And then I go on Canva to get my pictures.
Yeah, and Canva's a general place everybody goes.
Yeah, I was like, how do people get these really professional looking pictures? Because here I am just taking my own. And then I found Canva and I'm like, oh, this makes so much more sense. So it's been a really big learning curve. And you know what, with the editing, I got to say, it can be fun. I go back and forth. Sometimes I really hate it. And then sometimes I'm like, oh, this is kind of fun.
Now, I'll say, like, on my part, it's kind of crazy. Like, I do a little bit of editing, but my shows are known for being raw. So you hear some distortion, and depending on if it's a condenser mic or whatever mic I'm using, and that's what takes place there. So you touched on something also, Canva, promotion. Promotion is something I have not talked to any podcaster on my podcast about. How do you handle your Canva? Like, do you go in and, because I'll tell you a quick story. There's a fellow podcast, I will not mention their name, but they know who they are. They use just one thing from Canva. They will take the pictures off of there and they will slap on whoever their guest is. Same font, same everything, same color, never change anything. Just go with it. But it works for them. It's the one piece of Canva they use. Nobody says anything. Everybody appreciates it. Me, for instance, I have so many different templates. It depends on if it's a post, a story, or if it's going to Facebook. So how do you handle all that?
I like to go on there and play around. So like I did actually, which takes a lot of time. But the other day I'm revamping my podcast picture.
Okay.
And but yeah, I don't think because I also like to change it up, switch it up, be creative. I like to go in there and just find different ones, and then I'll put maybe a good quote that I found on the specific topic I did,
Mm-hmm.
and add it to a picture that maybe fits in with it. But yeah, I think Canva's pretty fun. And I recently, because I was paying for the pictures I liked, but I'm like, oh, there's free ones. I'll just go through the free ones and then pick the best one.
And see, that's where I learned my mistake too. I did the little trial for $12.99, and then I got to realizing that I'm not going to act like I'm this great web designer or any type of content creator like that. I like the ones that are already prepaid. I can just put my picture over top of it, change the colors a little bit, I'll take the whole text off and make a whole different text so that it's brand new, and I
Yeah.
can just go from there. And it's not costing me anything. I'm not saying I'm a cheapskate or anything, but I like those avenues there. Now, let me ask you this. How do you find your guest?
Well, mostly it's just been, I'll think of somebody I know. Like I did an episode on mental health with a guy I've known for 10 years, Kyle.
Okay.
And then and I have an episode on philosophy coming up with my friend Hope, who we were in philosophy together. Other times it's just been people online that I've met, especially through the John Maxwell group that I'm a part of.
Okay.
A lot of life coaches through that. And then I've realized I do know quite a few people, or I'll just reach out. There's different groups, especially on Facebook, where you can find a guest. And
Yes.
so I have some episodes coming up on emotional abuse where I found a doctor of counseling and then a survivor. And so that's where I found them. So that's what I've been doing. So far, it's been working. But yeah, I think it's fun that way too. It's fun to chat with your friends, even though I know they don't always. They do. It's not like they're maybe the biggest expert on something, but it is it's great to also have that dynamic with your friends when you're chatting, because you already know them, and it gets when you're getting into interviewing, because I get kind of nervous. So if I'm going to interview somebody I've never met before, I'm just like, oh. But if it's a friend, like there's an easy rapport.
Yeah, it's camaraderie and it's kind of natural.
Yeah.
Me, like, I don't know. I've shared with you certain ways that I find guests and different things like that and stuff like that. I don't know, like when I first started out, it was hard for me because I had people that I knew that were writing books, and I knew people, so I, like you said, knowing people, it worked out for me better that way. And then as it progressed and things moved up a little bit further, I showed you the other ways that we won't speak about on the podcast, but there's other ways to find people. And then the one thing that got crazy to me is the way that people find you. And I showed you some of that. Like I actually hate to say this, I actually prefer the ones that I find to the ones that find me, because it just seems like, it's just, ugh. But anyway, now.
You never know what you're going to get with somebody who finds you.
Right, because it's like, I'm wondering, and I hate that I flipped it on me real fast, but I kind of always wonder, like, how did this person find me? And I understand you can get on Podchaser or somewhere, and you can actually look on there and see the statistics of where someone's podcast is at. You can see certain information. And a lot of people do that. And I was just privy to this knowledge as of Saturday. I didn't know that people are actually sitting here and they're looking, like guests are out here like, I'm on their phone like, this podcast right here, Step Up Podcast, has 20 million subscribers. Let me go throw my 2 cents at them. And this is what'll tie into the next part of our podcast collage thing, because we both have an issue that we both have an agreement on. I did a video about this, and you know exactly what I'm about to get into. And this is about guest promotion.
Mm-hmm.
I'll start off real quick if you don't care. My issue has been with certain guests. I put out 20 to 21 episodes in a season. And usually my second season, I was very successful. The people had the same energy as me. And when they didn't, I was able to match it because I had a show before it to carry through to the show in between it. So 3 shows, the middle show was lackluster, but the other 2, sorry about that, was Taco Bell. 2 shows carried the one middle show, and the middle show is my weakest, and the guest never helps. How do you feel about that? Like about guests that don't properly do promotion?
It's very frustrating because I've had a few people, and because it's a good idea to kind of record a whole bunch at first, so you have them for, you know, a while, for
Like,
maybe a month or so in
like I
advance.
do, yeah.
Yeah. And I kind of didn't know this when I started, so I was kind of scrambling for a while. But I did a whole bunch, you know, last year at the end of the year, and people were like, "Hey, when are you going to post it?" And I was like, "Oh, well, you know, this month." And then they'll keep kind of asking me, and I'm like, "Oh, I understand you're fresh, you know, you want to get it out, but I told you, you know, it's going to be here." And then I kind of look at my downloads and I can see which locations they're in. And I'm like, it's that person, nobody from their town or their state or whatever listened. So I'm like, really? I don't understand. I thought you were excited about it. So it's very frustrating when they're not even promoting, and yet I'm promoting them because I'm also tagging them on social media when I release the episode. So, yeah, I think that's the most frustrating thing.
And I find it very frustrating too, because like I noticed like and I hate to put this out there, but this is something for all podcasters when we do these podcasts, and I will say this freely, not naming any guests or anything like that, and I'm not disrespecting anybody, but I'm going to say it like this. Like, I even got to the point where when you start doing these interviews, I look at it as a mutualistic thing. I'm trying to help someone build their audience. I'm not trying to help someone take my audience to just get their product out there. And that's what I've ran into. I've had some people that I didn't pay attention to, which I have new practices now, guys. I didn't essentially look at their social media presence, because some people are not coordinated that way. Some people are word of mouth. But I've never seen that word of mouth come to a listener.
Mm.
Never with any podcast I've done with any guests. So I've had some that have very weak social media presence, and I don't care if it's LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever. You have to have a presence on one of the 5 or 6 major ones. You need to have a presence somewhere, and that's something that I didn't get about having guests on, because I have guests on that had 50 followers. Which, if their story's compelling and stuff like that, I'm always for that. I will help that person out if they acknowledge it from the get go. But I've had guests that, you know, and I hate to say this, my season opener from this past season, this lady has it together, you know, and no promotion.
Hmm.
So yeah, I get what you're saying there. Like,
I
but
don't understand that though, because when I'm on a podcast like yours, hey, I'm excited. I'm like, oh, I got to be a guest. I mean, this is all new for me. So, as you know, being asked to be a guest. So maybe if people have been on it long enough, they don't get as excited. I don't know.
yeah, yeah,
But
but
it's kind of a, you know, why not promote yourself that you were on a podcast, you know?
right. And my whole thing is like I was telling you about the instrument I use, Hootsuite. Hootsuite gives me a lot more free time. And yes, I do post a little bit to my Instagram story. That's me personally, but my actual posts are something that I work up almost a week ahead of time. So I'm
Mm.
not really there in person. So I explained like the same thing I told you about how I promote everything. I explained this to my actual guest before we do a show. And I'm like, please at least have half of the energy that I have, because I'm going to promote you through that proverbial glass ceiling. And that's one thing that I've gotten in return out of 44 podcasts, 12.
Mm.
12 have had that much energy or more, you know. And if we do the or more, it's 6.
Yeah.
So that's kind of been one of those things there. So let me ask you this: so after you have a guest on, you do the show. After the first week of promotion, what's promotion like for you after that? Because that's something that, you know, when we're doing this right now, once again, we're helping podcasters understand, you know, what goes on there. So what's the second week of promoting that podcast from last week? How does that work out for you?
Oh, you know, I guess I'm, because my, like you suggested, I do more, but I do 2 podcasts a month. And so I put it, the day it's released, I'll post something, and then for about a week later I do it. And then I kind of stop until the next one. Or
Oh wow!
I know. Or I'll randomly add, like, put things. But there's so much you have to do. Like, I have to find pictures. Like on Instagram, everything is a picture. And I'm like, oh, I have to find a picture now. And I have to do this, and I have to find something good to say. And I don't always usually have something in my head to say.
So let me give you something today. This is what I do to guests, and this is something that is part of the profession of it. I get my guests to provide me with a media kit. that's the show notes technically, or a little bit of the show notes. And I tell them to give me 3 pictures. And the one thing I tell my guests is I say, give me 3 brand new pictures. I don't want the same picture that you're promoting or that you've been posting on Instagram for the last 6 months. I want something fresh with you and your product so that it's distinctive to my podcast. And when I
Oh.
and when I get that, like I oh, you gonna take a note on that one?
Oh no, I was just like, oh, that's a good idea. Because
Yeah.
when I ask for a picture, they just send me their picture that, there's, when you go to their website, it's the one on there.
Right. And so when they send me those generic pictures, like you're talking about, the ones that are everywhere, I put the same energy to how they send it to me and how I didn't get the 3 that I asked for. So that's how they get their promotion. Someone like, because I have a lady for my season 5 episode, right now, she sent all kinds of pictures. So it put me in a realm where I got to be on Canva finding something exotic to keep up with the energy she gave me.
Wow.
So that's one little thing that I take from there. So let me ask you this. If someone's aspiring to do a podcast, what would you tell them to do and what would you tell them not to do?
Whoa.
And I'll give you a little time, so I'll put a little dialogue out here real quick. The reason that I asked Stephanie this is because Stephanie has a great podcast. She puts out 2 episodes a month, which that is awesome. I've encouraged her to put out 2 more episodes just for the simple fact that she has good quality episodes. Might as well do a whole month worth of episodes. And the reason that I'm asking her these questions is because, like I said, there's a quantity of podcasts, but there's not quality in them. And with the 2 that she does, there's enough quality in them that it would supersede 4 of my podcasts to her 1, for the simple fact that she puts that much depth into her podcast. But I think that production, you could put 2 more out.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's very encouraging. I would say what you should do is just start. And if you're anything like me, you'll get so worked up over how to do it. And I wanted everything to be perfect the first time. But, they say just start and you'll learn as you go. And that's what I've been doing. And it was really hard for me because I want to know everything and have it all perfect before I start, which you're never perfect. So that's never going to happen. For what not to do, I would say one thing for myself that I'm aware of is don't I guess it's a thing you should do, but have integrity. So don't not have integrity. Just be yourself, and if you're for example, if I'm going to meet with somebody at a certain time on a certain date, and I've had people do this to me where they don't show up, and then a few days, they forget about it or something. A few days later, they're like, oh, whoops. Just be mindful of what you're doing and be aware that your guests are your guests. And so have integrity in that respect. You know what I mean?
I understand that because I got to take on that because I have a policy that I follow. It's called we schedule the podcast at 1:00. By 1:05, you're getting an automated email telling you that you missed our podcast.
Ooh.
Because I've like these are the horror stories that we don't talk about on podcasting, and that's one thing why I did this whole podcast collide deal. I have more guests that flake than I produce, and if I have almost 2 seasons on lockdown of episodes, then that you can imagine. Like I said, I was telling somebody I had a high profile guest, like someone that screams on the internet, super mindset coach that everybody follows. This person, I took a dive at them on December 3rd. We coordinated stuff. I got in touch with whoever I needed to in their department that works for them because they have a person you got to go through to get to them. And I scheduled my date with them, had everything set. The only thing that I forgot to do, I forgot to send the Zoom request over to them, but I still had the date locked down. When I sent the Zoom request over, they were already booked. Even though we had verbally agreed to it, had everything concrete. That my one mess up will not send that Zoom a link, even which was unprofessional on my part, still shouldn't have barred me from having that date. And when I tried to reschedule to get another date, the person told me that they were just booked up, like they answered my question with the same email and just added extra words. So I learned from that point on that it was a little hard. It hurt me a little bit, cut me deep.
Yeah.
But it taught me a lesson there to be more concrete in what I do, but also the same policy that I'm giving to my guests, I've got to follow it in life also.
Mm-hmm.
Because this guest thought that they were the next big thing, or they are the next big thing. They felt that there were certain things that I should do for them. And I technically feel that way to any of my guests. I feel like if we were going to go into my real recording studio at West Virginia, wherever, you wouldn't be 5 minutes late to it. You're not going to be 10 minutes late to it. Because if you were late, then I've already got someone else in your session time.
Yeah. Be mindful of people's time. I grew up with half my family are late people, and then half of us are early people. So I'm that person who's early, actually not even just on time, early. Because, and so seeing side of my family that was always late, I was embarrassed. And so, you hear like, don't waste people's time. And because you're not being mindful of other people's time. You're kind of saying, well, I don't care about your time because I'm late. And I know people don't mean it on purpose. They don't go, oh, I don't care about this person's time, I'm going to be late. But that's how it kind of comes across, right?
Right.
So, yeah. But I'm that person. I'm always early.
Right. And I always try to be prompt. And just like today, for instance, I was a little off because I was dealing with stuff on the phone and this and that. And I apologize to you on that one. But like I said, it's just certain levels of guests. And one thing I wanted to ask you about, another thing about your guests, like after you get done interviewing a guest, right? How do you handle the retention of who owns the video and all that stuff with your podcast?
Well, normally, so I had two friends who were unsure of how it was going to sound. So they said, can you send it to me after you edit it before you post it? So I did. And I knew I could trust them. But there was one person where I they asked for a video and I was like, okay, sure. Cause I don't always think of things until after. And then I'm like, oh, whoops. And he posted it on his social media. And actually this happened right away. And I said, oh, can you take it off? The episode will come out later, because if you post it, people are not gonna, it's all about numbers and coming to the specific, like if they're watching on your social media, they're not gonna come and listen to mine. And right. So it's all about the numbers, right? And the algorithm, I don't know if that's the right wording. So then when I did post the episode, he posted again the video, and I'm like, no. You're supposed to say, go listen to the episode. So now I know not to share the video with people. So plus I was like, because I first wanted to do a video podcast because people kept talking about video podcasts.
Yes.
And then I wasn't comfortable with it. And I said, no, I'd rather just do the normal podcast audio sound only. And so I really was not a fan that he released the video, but what can you do? That was also on my part, that was a mistake for actually sending it off.
Now, what I do, I'll tell you, which is kind of crazy, is like, I let everybody know this ahead of time, and sometimes I don't. I let them know in the middle of the podcast. Each video that I do, I take a little bit for my documentary because I'm showing, because I want to release this at some point. I always have to ask for permission, after we're done recording. A little piece, it doesn't matter what it is. I'm just showing like how you build these relationships with people, how they'll span out later, how you can do a podcast pretty much for free. Basically, that's what I'm doing right now. And you can make it work, certain ways, like there's strategies to everything you do in podcasting. It's not just this whole idea of people just dumping out episodes and getting followers and things like that to have a podcast, because that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I do with the video. So one thing that I want to talk to you about that we've talked about privately, about the numbers, about the followers, about the listeners, because these are things that don't get talked about in the podcast. And I'm 100% with everyone about this when I say this. My followers do not count as my listeners. My followers are other podcasters. That's something that in this whole makeup, I love the community of podcasters because you get so much support. But at the end of the day, it's podcasters listening to podcasters.
Yeah.
And some of us break the norm and can get outside of that and get other people to listen, some of us can. And then that's why I like stuff like the podcast collide, not in your case, but just in other people's cases. It generates out to other people so they can hear other podcasts. That's why I do my weekly shout outs to all those podcasts. And I always tell people, if someone doesn't tell me about your podcast, reach out to me, because I don't just sit there and look for other podcasts, because I don't want to follow the norm of a podcast, listen to a podcast, because that's all the listeners you're getting.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your take on that whole thing?
Oh, that's a good one. I do get followers on Instagram, and like you said, a lot of them are about other podcasts. At first it was exciting, but now it's like, oh yay, another podcaster following me, and not like an actual listener. But that doesn't equate to listeners. So that's sometimes where social media, I'm a bit, is this really working? Sometimes I'm not sure. I've done a lot of those master classes and webinar things where they talk about social media, they talk about podcasting, all these different things. But I've also heard, because I've had certain family and friends who might have listened to one or two, but they don't listen to all of them. And it kind of hurts your feelings, but then you realize, well, it might not be their thing, and you can't really rely on your friends and family.
Right.
You need to find your own listeners who want to listen to your podcast. And so that's the thing I've had a difficult time of, first of all, finding. I don't know how to find these people. Except I have been told, you follow other podcasters who are similar to you on social media, and then you comment all the time, and then people might see your comments and listen to your podcast. I don't know how much that works, but yeah, you're right. And somebody might listen because I do different topics, and I interviewed the mayor of my city and his wife, and it wasn't about politics. It was about the death of their son. And so I had people listen, but they might have just listened for that. They're not going to listen to all of my other episodes. So you want to find your followers who want to listen to every episode of yours.
Right.
That's the tricky thing. I don't know how to find them.
Right. And like I said, in that part right there, even though I can say how many number I have or whatever, there's no proven formula to give that to someone. And I hate that people sell that to people, that I can tell you how to find this listener and this listener will stay with you. What I found, besides my girlfriend and a few others in the community, that I listen to their podcast just as much as they listen to mine. My own mother, she listens to a fellow podcast more than she does mine. Just because I promoted it one time and she's seen it and I put it on her. And mind you, my demographics 30 is almost 28 to 72. So I don't hit that 18 to 24, in which, like I always tell people, I don't care if I hit the demographic, because they don't spend money. They don't equate to much of anything. When they get to 25 and higher, that's when people are more relaxed and more stable and things like that, unless they have an escrow account that they were blessed into, So, so my whole thing is like, what I found that's just very organic and stuff. Like I told you, the one tactic that I use, and generally from that tactic, it's usually that younger person saying, hey, I don't like this podcast. I'll give it to my mom or dad. I'll program it in their phone. They'll like it. And bam, that's how they get it. And I'll say one thing about all social media, Twitter, everything's fine. But I will say Facebook has been zero assistance in helping me build anything. It seems like to me, Facebook just wants money, correct?
Oh my word. Every time I get a notification on my Facebook page, I'm like, oh, a notification. No, it's, you can boost your page by doing an ad. And I'm like, and I tried once and I did it wrong. So they rejected the ad because I don't know, it's supposed to be very specific. And I did it wrong. And I'm like, oh, this is so annoying. But yeah, I don't get many people interacting with my page on Facebook. More Instagram.
Yeah, and Instagram's where I get it. And what I found that I have to do, and I'll tell you, this is crazy, and this is a tactic for all podcasters, because I said that's why we do these podcaster collide. I actually, like you said something about your local town. I actually went in and looked at where I live in West Virginia. We're a small state. So I can look at 3 cities and look at the TV newscasts, and I will follow people out of there at first. See if I can attract listeners from different places. I have like 14 different tactics that I should put inside of a book and sell it like everybody else does, but I won't. Um, but that's one of the things that I think, like in your local area, that's how I pulled my local listeners. And then, like you said, the strangest thing, I live in West Virginia, which is the Mid-Atlantic, which we're considered the North-South, but we're the South-North, if that makes sense.
Whoa.
What
I'm
it
in
is
Canada, so I don't even understand
all right,
where you are.
all right,
Sorry.
so what I'm saying is, all right, if you're on the Atlantic coast, you go from Vermont to Florida, right?
Uh-huh.
We're the middle area between all that on the East Coast.
Okay.
So being there, it puts me in a weird area because if I travel too far north or too far south, I'm getting different groups, and that's and I found that a little bit of diversity in these different groups is how you get listeners, and like it's so much that goes into it. Like I actually, and I'm sorry that I'm going so much in this podcast, but I'll say this and then I'll get right back over to you. I do a little research. I'm like, hey, mental health awareness. How many podcasters are doing 40 episodes this week about that? Mm-hmm. Just random stuff, local things. Do I need to throw in a local West Virginia podcast so my West Virginians will jump in? And I will say this 100%. West Virginia ranks as in states, it's my 5th listener. And my podcast is called West Virginia and Commonplace.
Wow.
California is my biggest audience.
Wow.
Maybe because I'm country or something like that. Now, back to you real quick. You were telling us about everything that's going on with you, but you didn't plug your blog. You didn't tell us where we can find you at, where they can find you on Instagram and places like that. Because one crazy thing about podcast listeners, they will listen and skip through. So I need you, Stephanie, to plug everywhere where they can find your podcast and your blog.
Okay. So my website is www.stuffuppodcast.com. And that's just one word. Instagram, I'm StuffUp_podcast to separate the stuff up in the podcast. And then Facebook, I'm also just StuffUp_podcast. Okay. And you can find me on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I listen to Podcast Addict. That's my podcast app. But pretty much anywhere you listen to podcasts, you can find me. Most of my friends listen on Spotify.
Well, out here, we're Apple people. And then there's Google.
Okay.
So...
I don't even know. I found Apple Podcasts on my computer, but I've never like downloaded the app. I don't even know how to. I'm really kind of like tech bad. I had a hard time one time finding Apple Podcasts because I was on iTunes, and I'm like, wait, where's this thing?
It's difficult for a few people, but like just with that. It's all in your motor with that. That's another podcast for another day. So, Stephanie, once again, I want to thank you for being on West Virginia and Commonplace. Is there anybody you want to give a shout out to? Is there an episode coming up real soon? Because the crazy thing is like we're doing this episode today, right? Mm-hmm. And me and you both know that we have to, after we get off this, we work out a date to release it or whatever, which it'll be a Saturday because we know I got my normal, everybody drops a podcast Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but these special ones I do on Saturdays because I really enjoy them. Is there anybody you want to give a shout out to? Anything going on your podcast that anybody needs to know about, or anything going on in the future with the voiceovers? Like, is your podcast, are you shifting? Are you staying on the same network you're on? Are you moving? What's going on with your podcast going into this whole new year?
Well, I want to give a shout out to my mom because she listens. She does listen to all my podcasts. And yeah, so I have an episode coming up called Overcoming Obstacles with a woman who's a life coach. She was a widow at like the age of 24, and then she's gone through quite a different things. So she's a life coach and helps people how to figure out how to move forward. I'm talking with my friend Hope. We're talking about philosophy and why it matters, especially in today's world. Critical thinking is so important. And I just get so crazy when I go on social media and I see some of my friends and family and I'm like, oh dear, no. And then in March, I'm going to do a series on emotional abuse. So that's going to be definitely difficult. And then, I'm interviewing my friend Eric Crosby, who's got a podcast called True. Ooh. So we're going to be talking about podcasting on that. So yeah, some fun stuff coming up.
Okay. So once again, I thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much. This is fun.
All right.